Join me for a conversation with Starforged artist Joshua Meehan.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, if you like what I do here on this podcast and you want to support my work, you can always like, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast. Those things are super, super helpful. Also, I create role-playing game resource books. Hopefully you know that by now. Those can be found at DriveThruRPG, Amazon.com, or my own website, DiceGeeks.com. All you have to do is search for the Book of Random Tables or Dice Geeks, all one word, and you will find them. They help you cut down your Game Master prep time. And goodness knows, we need more time these days. All right, guys, here is today's interview. My guest today is an artist whose work can be seen in Ironsworn, Starforged, Joshua Meehan. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. When did you first start playing tabletop role-playing games?
I started playing actually in college, even though I've been on the peripheries and been inspired by it since I was a kid. But it was thanks to a college friend and colleague named Claire, who had been designing games forever and had been well more versed into it than I was, saw that I was interested, started bringing me in and showing me not only D&D, we didn't really touch that. It was more like Fate, Blades in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse and Monsters of the Week, and a lot of those other kind of games, which was really interesting. Story first kind of games or games that focused on that. But so since what was that, 2008, and I've kind of been hooked in ever since.
Okay, that's interesting. You would be kind of in the minority of guests then, because usually everybody, the gateway drug of this hobby is usually Dungeons and Dragons. So that is interesting that you kind of came into through some of the newer story games. And is that what you kind of hoped tabletop role playings would be, kind of focused more on the story than on mechanics and things like that?
It was actually really eye-opening for me because as an outsider, I was like, okay, I know I was very familiar on the outside looking in on what Warhammer is, because once we got internet and I was able to see that, those were all the little miniatures and figurines that were up in the hobby stores that you'd pass by in the mall. Yeah. Next to all the train sets at the time. But so those artists like Adrian Smith, Ian Miller, and later on Karl Kopinski, they became like the people that I was inspired by and captured my imagination. And so I knew like war games, okay, you move things, you use rulers, you roll dice. I kind of see that from the packaging and stuff and how it might work. My brothers and I would then cannibalize a bunch of games and try to make our own rules using Legos, army men, sandbox, rulers, and dice from board games and fake money from Monopoly, like whatever we could to make our own legacy games. And then, so coming into college and getting introduced to the idea that there was these mechanical heavy games and things that focused more on the mechanics and the simulation side of things. But then you had this whole wave of story first and story centric games was really exciting to me. And being able to just learn about putting adjectives and focusing on those as like, that's all you need to then influence how you're going to drive your characters' wants and desires and goals and the obstacles that they would overcome was really cool. And so that became, I liked playing in a little bit of both, so that at some points I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go over there. I want to see like the numbers and stuff and play around there and see how are they using the mechanics to interpret what they want to do for nitty gritty stuff. But then I also want to go over and get all that cinema and that storytelling aspects that can be seen, and like how the mechanics can influence a particular genre or a particular story, and not always one size fitting all.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really fascinating. And so was it kind of the idea of characters that really hooked you into tabletop role playing games, or was it just, maybe like world building, or what kind of grabbed you a little bit more?
Yeah. Since I've always liked world building, and that's always fun, but I feel like it's similar with video games and open world concepts, where it's like you can have an open world, but it's not until you put stuff in to interact with, it's that interaction that I find the juicy part. And so having characters interacting with things is really exciting for myself. And in turn, if I'm running a game, it's inviting players to participate in that interaction, whether it's through creating the world together or their actions causing great consequences throughout the story. I find that's one of the magical parts about that you don't get other places of media and games.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, of course, in the intro, I mentioned that you are an artist. So I guess when you are creating a picture or an image, are you thinking about the people or the individuals in that image and how they are telling a story? Is that something you think about when you're kind of crafting an image?
Oh yeah. A lot of the initial work doesn't at least for myself, as I know there's a million ways to make a piece of art. A lot of the process for me begins with what is the purpose of the art? What are we trying to communicate? And then how are the best ways that we can communicate that? If it's a piece about a character, for example, how does that character want to display their ideals and attributes? What do they value? And how is that going to be informed in the piece? And how they approach things is also important. So that all comes into their pose. You can find a lot of personality and a lot of voice and infer a lot of things through your movement and gesture, and the where you draw the person's eye with lighting is also another thing, and that creates a whole sense of mood. And you want to, especially when you're working with tabletop role-playing games or RPGs, where your artwork is going to be the only other source of influence for what tone you want to set and what kind of world that is being that we're creating in our imaginations. That that art has to have a purpose and be pointing towards something, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said there is really important about tabletop RPGs and having that artwork, because, in text, you can describe the world, but in many cases, the artwork is almost the shorthand, right? To just show you the whole mood and tone of the world. And I was just thinking, years and years ago when I was a teenager and walking into a bookstore and picking up, say, like the D&D campaign setting, Dark Sun. And, you look at the cover and you're just like, it's, post-apocalyptic kind of wasteland, but there are dwarves and elves, and it just set the whole tone of this harsh, forbidding world, like instantly with the cover image, right? Is this
right.
done? And of course, there are many others that have done that as well. So I think that is a really good point, because, whereas, even something like a Star Wars role-playing game or Star Trek role-playing game, you have decades of material behind you, and you are probably, bringing some of that with you even before you see the rule book, right?
Right. When it comes to, I think that's why we're seeing a resurgence of IPs and things like that, because they carry with them a lot of that shorthand. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that media has already brought that on, but it's to bring it back, like there's a concept in art school and in concept art forums where when an exercise where to kind of get the point across that I want you to envision a tree, and then everyone envisions a different tree, and then everybody and that tree can then be changed by adjectives and by lighting and mood to convey a different feeling to the audience. And you end up doing, as an exercise, you do not only just one tree, but then you do that tree in a bunch of different settings, kind of deal, to practice that iteration and the power of your composition, lighting, and how you want to make the player or the audience feel.
Yeah, that's interesting. And of course, when I had not heard of that exercise before. Of course, I'm not a visual artist, but that is an interesting thing, because you say, well, like, draw a tree. Well, if the tree is, tall and straight, or is it short and gnarled and bent, or is there light on the leaves so they're kind of bright green, or do the leaves almost look black because there is dark lighting on it? And there are many variables, I would imagine, right?
Right.
Kind of almost limitless, almost, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like a dungeon master describing a scene, you're choosing and picking which ones that you want to press upon your table or your audience as when you're designing a game. And those are all things that you keep in mind when you're planning out your images. At least, especially like working on Ironsworn, it was very particular for Ironsworn Starforged.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But your point about, being a dungeon master or game master is really good. And I want to follow up on that because, and I know, especially sometimes for me at the beginning of a session, or when the players enter a new area or something like that, I really, kind of lean into some of the description. And I have to say, I love watching the players' faces, as I describe, this gnarled forest or whatever it is, or a space station or something. And you can see, my players usually are very highly creative people in their own right. You can see their facial expression just change as they're picturing what I'm describing. And I always find that a very joyful experience when I can see that, my words are kind of inspiring their imaginations to picture this landscape or this, this old freighter, kind of a broken down freighter spacecraft or something like that.
Yeah, it's very fun. And I know games also that allow the players to then have that, and then yes, and on top of that, inviting players to do that. That's always my favorite. And when we actually, a group of college friends from art school and myself finished a multi-year campaign, meeting once a month kind of thing. So it wasn't like we were meeting every week, but it ended with the characters or the players, two of the players at the table were getting married in real life. And so they had their characters get married. And there was this whole campaign short arc that focused on getting them the ring forged and everything, which became the actual engagement ring. And that was a really cool moment.
Yeah, that is really cool. And I think your point there is great as well, that the game master, the dungeon master, is not the only person at the table or on Roll20 or whatever you're playing these days, or on Zoom, that can add into the world. And I've mentioned it before on the podcast that I'm really sorry I didn't realize that. When I had first started running games, because it would have taken a lot of work off of me. So that is one of my tips that I tell game masters, that it's like, if you are feeling overwhelmed with a lot of prep and creative decisions, just ask your players. You need you're arriving at a new island. And because your players kind of threw you a curveball and you don't even know what's on that island, well, ask them what's on the island. Ask them to describe it to you and just go around the table. And you will find that your players will love that island even more, and that you will be inspired to add then in your own details that surprise and pull them in even more. And sadly, I think I learned that one night when I was tired and the Mountain Dew wasn't working anymore. And I was just like, after being peppered with like 10,000 questions, I was just like, what do you think's there? And sadly, that was my introduction. But now I use it as very purposefully. And I find that it just gives the players just that extra buy-in to the world, and they love being creative as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And now we've mentioned it a couple times. You have done art for Ironsworn Starforged. Could you kind of just give us a brief, kind of outline of what that RPG is, and then we'll dive into it and your work around it.
Sure. Yeah. So Ironsworn Starforged is the science fiction edition by Sean Tompkin of the Ironsworn game, which is a solo RPG game it's a game that can be played solo, guided, or co-op. And it derives from Powered by the Apocalypse style games. I think it's more of a derivative from that at this point, with its own kind of set of mechanics, but that is where a lot of it came from. And that one set in a more Norse fantasy, hard fantasy, low magic kind of setting. And Ironsworn Starforged is now the science fiction, science fantasy version of that game, which sets everything up in a whole new realm, or a whole new place called the Forge, which is this globular cluster set apart from the galaxy as we know it. And what's interesting about Ironsworn that I love is the buy-in that it gives you right up front with a very strong session zero or session prep with you're developing your truths, where you decide what is true about the world from how you got to the location that it's set in, what was the terrible cataclysm that drove you to this place, and then what are like the community, everything from the communities to the obstacles and the precursors that were once here, and even all the way to war and like what that looks like. You get to decide that with you at your table, which makes every game feel different. Every campaign feels a little different and has a different flavor, but it also gives you some nice hooks that the players and yourself can all latch into, which I love.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really great way to handle, like you said, a session zero, or kind of just the pre-campaign as you're kind of laying the groundwork. And of course, you can do it randomly as well. You can just roll dice and kind of put that combination together. And I always love that. Of course, I make books of random tables, so I love the random aspect, because sometimes you just never know what two things kind of put together are going to create when they come together. And I really enjoyed that about Starforged at the the beginning with the truths and the creation there. And I love the random aspect to it.
Me too. I think that if I recall when we were playtesting it, because I did an extensive series of playtests, as well as we had a whole Discord with hundreds of people, way more than we were expecting, who would give us feedback when it came to those truths, and developing them was a very extensive part of the process, along with the ability to roll. That was something I think that was added in Starforged, if I recall. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, as I love that we give the players in that not only your consent to do to choose to design your own, or to roll. And I think that's really cool, because it gives you that power to choose.
Yeah, and I think as early as you can get players, or obviously you said it can be played as solo or guided or co-op. I think the earlier you get the people involved with kind of the groundwork of your universe or your world or whatever you're playing, I think that's when people are then into it, right? Like,
Yep.
once if you start kind of at the basic kind of groundwork, like you laid out a few things about Starforged. It's like, here's a forge. It's this globular cluster set apart from the galaxy. But what does it look like in there? A lot of those come from those truths. And once you start doing that, then I think you just pull players right into the fabric of what they're creating, and they're gonna they're gonna have fun later on, right? Digging into some of these foundational things about the world or the setting that they're going to be playing in. Sadly, I discovered Starforged a little late, but I did back it as a late pledge on Kickstarter. And I do have
Thank you for your support.
Yeah, no problem.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. I have to say, I was blown away by it. I was like, I was just like, I read like one paragraph and I was like, well, that's easy. Click. Because it is, I don't know, it is quite good, and it is very excellent role-playing game. And I knew right away that I really wanted to play it. So much so that I recorded my sessions and launched a podcast called Forged Among Stars, where I'm kind of recorded the exploits of my character, because I wanted to explore the rules and the world. And I haven't had much experience with the Powered by the Apocalypse games other than reading a few of them. So this was a good chance for me to dive into it. And I have to say, I was really blown away by it. It was awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, having listened to it, I love the assets that you chose and how you incorporate those. Especially the symbiote one. It's not one that comes up, but when it does, it's like it infers so much about what your character is going to be like, and it's one of my favorite assets.
Yeah. And what Joshua was referring to is in my podcast, Forged Among Stars, my character, Hawking Duvall, has a symbiote, which is part of these assets that you get to help your character. And so I chose a symbiote. So it is an alien symbiote that lives inside of my character. And I interpreted that as someone, an entity or being that can speak with him occasionally. And it also gives you, of course, some mechanical benefits here and there. You can call on it. And I just love that concept as a story. I remember reading it was some golden age science fiction. I was probably reading it about a decade ago or so, but it was from the 30s or the 40s. And there was this concept of an alien symbiote who could make the protagonist stronger, or smarter, and have access to, like, it was if I'm remembering correctly, it was like an ancient being that had lived like thousands of years. So it had all these knowledge, but it was inside of the protagonist. And of course, we've had some of that in popular culture as well, with some other TV shows and movies. Of course, this Spider-Man, the Venom symbiote, in that as well. But I always loved that concept. And when I rolled randomly on the table and I got the name Monarch for the symbiote, I was just like, well, of course, he's an ancient monarch and he's lived like thousands of years. Of course, that's exactly what I wanted. And it totally rolled it randomly, but there's that random element again, but it went right into something that I really enjoy. And I think it worked really great for the character. And I want to say thank you to you for listening to it, because that was just an experiment on my part, because really As far as solo games go, I haven't done much solo gaming since I was a kid, but I will tell you, if I would have discovered Starforged, if that existed when I was like 16, I may not have left the house for a long time because it hooks you pretty quick. And it in the way that the solo play is handled with rolling difficulty numbers randomly and overcoming them with your modifiers and your action dice is quite good. And it feels very good when you roll and you get such a variety of outcomes. So so part of me is thankful that it wasn't available when I was 16. Otherwise I wouldn't have left the house but I am so glad I discovered it. And of course, you have done the art, or a lot of the art for it. And it is, I think we should talk about the setting a bit, because, even though you roll truths about your setting and kind of make it your own, there are some basic guidelines. And why don't we talk a little bit kind of about the setting and some of the influences, and then how you were trying to, use your artwork to kind of reinforce some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the setting of Ironsworn Starforged, it's a game that's supposed to help you envision stories that you would essentially like tell around a campfire kind of deal, where the deeds and the legacy of the player characters, and that's done with focusing on themes such as stressful situations, supernatural horror that can be dialed as you like, action-oriented scenes like the chase scenes and battles that you'll see in a lot of sci-fi movies, some of which would be like The Mandalorian, and an Alien is another one, and Firefly is another media kind of tonal standpoint, and the way that the story beats progress, which are similar to how you would then enact a move in Starforged, which is a mechanic for making progress towards a vow that you, or which is like a promise that you will go on this quest to do something for someone else to help them on their journey, and that those deeds that you accomplish and those vows that you fulfill will grow your legacy, which is how you directly tied to the XP and your character's growth. It will incentivize you to make discoveries and explore the world, encouraging you to either envision it yourself or roll on the myriad of tables that are within the book. I think he has like 100 or 200 pages. I can't remember exactly how many tables. Very well organized. Sean is an amazing master when it comes to designing and layout and creating onions of Oracle tables. And then the last way to get XP is by creating those bonds, which is all supposed to loop back into itself. Which I love. And I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit there, so we may distill it down. But yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I think you set it up quite well. And you mentioned, some of the mechanics there. I think that, and about XP and the vows, which are critical. So, we should definitely not overlook those things. And I think the vows, the way those work and how XP is made, really sets it up so it can become really a true, solo game without without it just being a daydream kind of thing, right? Like instead of just, I imagine my character doing these things and they do them or whatever. But here, let's place these things on here. I have to do these things. That there's some mechanical rules and that you have to follow. So I think it really sets up, the solo aspect of it really well. And the vows is a great part of that. And then, of course, you did mention some about the setting. You mentioned like part of the Mandalorian, some of Alien, some of Firefly, and then I think in the paragraph for the book it says like it's a retro future, like kind of the Battlestar Galactica reboot, and once you name those things, I think most of the time it's just like that's kind of what happened to me. I read the paragraph that said some of those things on the website, and I was just like, click. It was just like, oh. So it's Mandalorian, Firefly, so Star Wars, Firefly, Battlestar Galactica, and Alien, and something, all rolled into one. Well, I like all of those things. So I'm in. So,
right.
It's like, it's not even, I didn't even require much thought, because if you take elements, if you can take the best elements from all of those, the world will be incredible, and I think that's a really good an interesting way that Starforged was set up, because that's what we all love anyway, right? we all love those things, right? We want to be in Mal's crew, and we want to be on Tatooine, and we may want to face cosmic horror. I don't know if that one is exactly like we want to face it, but like there is something intriguing about it, even if we don't want to face it. So and the idea too of kind of the using a retro future idea instead of where everything's white and looks like an Apple store and it's all wireless, but also having the idea that there's a future where there are still cords on phones or something like that. It just adds an element of kind of, I don't know. I don't know why that's appealing, but it is. I was just thinking about that. I don't know exactly why that's appealing, but it just offers kind of a different view, don't you think?
Yeah, I think there's a tactileness that I really enjoy when it comes to the envisioning of the tech, that everything has a little bit of grit. It's all been lived in. I know I like my Westerns and I like my true grit movies. And so having something like that where it feels like everything has been around for a while. Nothing's shiny and nothing's new unless it's unnaturally made to be that way, and that's where like the precursors and their unknowable tech comes from, and causes another thing for people to venture for or to overcome with some of the weird dials that you can play with in the truths. And you'll see that a lot in the art, is that everything that I went through and what Sean and I did to envision or to find references for everything from the clothing to the to how the ships are, they harken back to a lot of the kit bashing days of Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica, and the way that those ships emulate things, and you see that a lot in The Expanse too, the way that they've put a lot of time and care into making those feel real and lived in spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll dive into the art a little bit more, but I did want to follow up. It is interesting. There is something about that lived in quality, right? Like, it's usually like if you see a science fiction movie or TV show and everything, I don't know, maybe this is just something in writers or something, but if like everything's clean and everything's white and everything looks brand new, there's usually something terribly wrong.
Yeah. What's wrong? I don't trust this. This is a front. Yeah.
You're like, there's zombies. Somebody's mind controlling them. The computer is mind controlling everybody because this is not normal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But and when you talk about the art of Starforged, I think you've done a really great job at capturing some of these feelings, like, and I would like to dive in a little bit more on some of the art and talk about Because the idea of Starforged 2 is that this is not a pleasant necessarily future, right? This is like you're clinging to life on worlds that are barely habitable kind of thing.
Right.
And, you're exploring these places, and every once in a while there'll be a habitable world, but most of the times you're going to have to wear a respirator, or, it's going to be too hot, or it's going to be too cold, or something like that. And so when you were, kind of approaching the art for that, what were some of the things that you were thinking about? Like, to you, what is going to communicate that lived inness or the hardness of people who have to like cling to survival?
Yeah. So for example, if you look at the cover for Starforged was like a really strong point where we wanted to capture a lot of that feeling. So there's this variation of tech so you see like she's got a ad hoc heavy gun that shoots some kind of plasma energy, but it's manufactured from a bunch of World War II and World War I weapons and some other random bits that I found of junk and of vehicles to create this makeshift weapon. But they also have a sword that's like a saber, and that has an emblem that's been engrafted onto it of the which would later evolve into the Ironsworn star compass, which is a symbol for Ironsworn who are making their own paths and always pointing towards the next vow, kind of thing, as the vow that they make is kind of like their true north, and so they know they always have to continue that in that direction, and they will make progress, kind of thing. And there's like there's a floating ball droid that's surveying the area, but we see that the lasers, due to the natures of the forge, they act almost as like fire, the way that they're coming off, and they're unstable. Probably found this or built this using old pre-calamity tech. In this case, the red, usually whenever I put red lights in the tech and stuff, I'm usually thinking of, okay, well, this is something that's unstable, experimental, and is of the forge. Everything in the forge has that red tone to it. Whereas if it's blue, green, cooler tones, those are, or even a little nicer looking or sleeker, those are things that are pre-calamity, from an age gone by. And so you can kind of see a nice mix and match of that. And that's also emblematic of that sometimes tech fails. And we wanted to show that these people, even if they didn't have anything on them, that like if they lost their tricorder scanner kind of thing, or they lost their laser pistol or their lightsaber, if they had one of those, like they're still formidable and tough in and of themselves. And you'll see that in the supply belts and in the pouches of gear and the resourcefulness and the makeshift chainmail that some people wear, and the leathers that are all handmade and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's this mishmash of handmade and hand forged things mixed in with ad hoc tech and stuff that's been blended together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's interesting. I did not realize that when we saw red tech, we were seeing stuff from the forge, and when we were seeing the other ones, that was kind of pre Exodus, or why the people had come to the forge. That's interesting. That's an interesting idea. I'm gonna have to go back and look at some of the images and see that. And I know we talked about a few things. Of course, some of the big ones, Mandalorian, and you mentioned The Expanse. I assume you were drawing kind of ideas from all of these, and then possibly some others as well when you're kind of coming to look at the artwork.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to looking at the work, I've been a huge fan of science fiction ever since I had the 97 VHS collection of the original trilogy for a Christmas. And I would watch the making of section of each video over and over and over. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do when I grow up. That's what I want to do when I grow up. And or something like it. And so this whole thing has been kind of a love letter to all the science fiction that I've watched. I've watched all of Babylon 5. I've watched all of Stargate. I'm a huge fan of Stargate SG-1, Atlantis. I even like Discovery for as much as flack it got. I still like that it was doing something new and different and had some interesting stories to tell based on those characters. And the way that it kind of juxtaposed really old new age tech that's been around forever, that's a beyond our tech level, and these human or the human flaws and how we get in our own way. When it came to a lot of, trying to think which other things, I know, of course, Dune, and the way that there's a lot of very descriptive factions, and the way their sense of scale in both Dunes is really amazing, and even in the books, and being able to draw from some of that for iconography and just the way, seeing how people identify and how they describe how they identify people in those scenes and cultures, and then bringing some of that into this. As I know you'll find in our book, one of the major points for us was to make sure that we were as diverse as possible when showcasing people in the Forge. So we made, I was going through and seeing, okay, how many people do we have? And then making sure that we're not leaving anybody out, and kind of always trying to check our biases on that point. And so there was a lot of time sifting through things to make sure that we were showing people from all different race, creeds, and backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love to hear that you watched all of Babylon 5. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes that gets, I know it still has a really good fan base, but every once in a while I'll run into somebody who hasn't heard of it, and I'll be like, oh, no.
Yep.
Let's talk about Babylon 5 for a few minutes, because I can't let you go without talking about Babylon 5. But no, that's really cool. And
the biggest thing I liked about that show is how from season 1, the people that you end up hating, you end up loving by the end of the series.
Yeah. And
like just the way that it did right by its characters, to let them go through their motions and grow with the whole, all the complicated issues that they were dealing with on the station. I really liked that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those shows that's really a kind of a testament to planning and forethought, and having, an arc that has been planned out, which it's very strong.
Yeah, very strong. Especially it comes really out in like seasons 2 and 3, and kind of the beginning of season 4, where you can really see, there are scenes in the first season that make sense in season 3, right? They were out of place in season 1, and you're like, well, okay, that was just a scene, whatever. And then season 3, you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like payoff. Okay, that's, this is awesome. And so, yeah, that is a very interesting show. Of course, they've talked about rebooting it now, but that seems to be on hold, because they're the sale of the CW might be happening. So kind of interesting going on there. And then also, another show we haven't talked about much on the podcast, but I know a lot of people watch it, of course, is Stargate SG-1. And I think people, every once in a while, of course, we mentioned Star Wars with the new films, and of course, Star Trek with, I don't know how many even new shows of Star Trek there are right now. It's like 6, maybe 7. I don't even know.
They're just now coming out with Picard season 2, and they finished filming season 3.
Yeah. And then, and then with obviously the Star Wars, not only the films, but on Disney Plus, all of the material, the teaser trailer for Obi-Wan Kenobi's show just dropped a few days ago as we're recording this. And so it's so much, media is coming out around these properties. I think, I guess maybe at some point, now that Amazon has officially been able to buy MGM, we're going to get some Stargate SG-1 reboots or something, or continuations.
Very cool.
but that is one. Obviously, there's a lot of fandom around it as well, but sometimes gets overshadowed by Star Wars and Star Trek, and But Stargate SG-1 is. That TV show was incredible, right? It just gained strength over, and you think, oh, season 2's, season 1's good, season 2's good, and then like you're just into it. And by, in the later seasons, oh my gosh, the writers managed, I've never seen a show where they've managed to take a clip episode, which is like TV's throwaway episode so you can save money. I have never seen a TV show take a clip episode and make it like one of the best episodes of the show, right? Like they were just into it. They knew when to take themselves seriously, when to joke at themselves. It was a great TV show, and
absolutely,
yeah, absolutely.
And it was really cool actually seeing the actors from Farscape being able to be incorporated in later seasons as well as SG-1 and of Atlantis, and seeing that whole, just like, because that was also another very quirky and weird but awesome show.
Yeah,
it's like a whole different flavor. So you were getting a lot, and I think now we are seeing a whole new resurgence in the last couple of years of great sci-fi, including even Foundation, which we finished on Apple Plus or whatever they call it, Apple TV,
Apple TV, something like that. Yeah, I haven't got to watch Foundation,
and that was one where my partner and we were both watching through just like how the characters, it's a very character driven story in the way they chose to present it. So you're seeing a lot of diversity. You're seeing a lot of just how their actions and their wants and desires and their vows and quests that they're going on are all interacting with each other and playing out over the course of this very long stretch of time, which was really interesting. As a person who's played now a lot of Ironsworn and a lot of Starforged, you start to envision beats of stories as different moves, and whether they are a strong hit, which is like an absolute success and then some, or a weak hit where they get what they wanted, but they have to, it's a give and take in those situations, or where they completely missed. They shot their shot and they missed and failed, and now have to deal with paying the price for that miss. Yeah. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
And I definitely recommend it. It was a fun one.
Yeah. I'll have to check it out. I don't know when I'm going to watch all this stuff. Honestly, I have to pick very carefully. So maybe I'll try to check that one out. But yeah, you mentioned like the actors from Farscape, which was a very interesting show in and of itself. And they joined SG-1, and also Lexa Doeg from Andromeda joined later as the doctor and daughter of the new general in the later seasons of Stargate SG-1. I'm like the only person that remembers Andromeda, but I talk about it on the podcast all the time. And I've interviewed some of the people who worked on it, writer and executive producer, and that. And I love that show, even though I think it gets overlooked because they had such a low budget, and things kind of spiraled out of control in the later seasons. Let's be honest about that. But the world building and the setup for for their world was very unique for television, because it was completely different than Star Trek, Star Wars, or SG-1, which was going on at the time. Just completely different, even though there were still spaceships and some of the same elements. It was just completely different, and I think it's just interesting to see how sci-fi can be taken in so many different ways, even though you have laser guns and spaceships and planets and a few androids and a few of the some of the basics. You can take science fiction settings like to all different places, and I really enjoyed that old show, and I think obviously that is one of the reasons why I am drawn to Starforged as well, is because here is a unique place that takes elements from Dune and all of these other amazing sci-fi universes, and you can kind of, rework them into your own unique, setting. And I find that awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say that just like from the wealth of knowledge and expertise we had on this. I know because Sean didn't do it alone. I just wanted to really quick shout out, if I could,
Sure,
the other
absolutely.
members of the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Sean, Sean Tompkins is the writer and designer of the Ironsworn system and of Ironsworn Starforged, and also does all the editing and layout for the book. Then I was lead illustrator, and with that we also brought on Jeff Zugale, who designed the awesome cutaway ship to kind of bring back that idea of like in those Star Wars books when you get to see like all the nicks and crannies and all the systems, which is great. And Sarah Dollinger, we brought on as well as a creature artist, which you'll see her work on the I think it's the Hellcat and the Drift Shark, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
But those are located in like the NPC book or the NPC chapter of the book where you see some pre-made foes. And when it comes to, let's see, additional writing, editing, consulting, we had the absolute tabletop awesome team, James Kearney, Matt Click, Mike Barker, and Tim Kearney, who helped create a lot of those NPCs and other stuff. And we're consulting with Sean as well, and they helped run the awesome Kickstarter and fulfillment. We had Nathan Gray with his icons. All the assets have a custom icon, and all the truths have a custom icon that were all interpreted by Nathan. And it was because of his interpretation of the Ironsworn star compass that kind of became our logo going forward with all the stuff, and who, like, as a symbol of the Ironsworn, which is what he does and what they do is very, very cool. I love it. And also, one of the coolest things I think was not only the digital tool support, which we have Ethan, Dominic Elliott or Zeno, Nick Botten, and Arsec, who run all the different myriad of digital tools that you can use from Roll20 to the Stargazer and the Data Sworn on the Discord. You also have safety tools that were implemented by and developed by Kiana Shaw and Lauren Bryant Monk, which are actual moves that you use to start your sessions. And when you come up to something, where they give you permission and incentive to use editorial tools to make sure that your story is going in a place, or not going in a place you don't want to, and continues to move towards a place you want. It brings up a lot of cool stuff. And then, of course, for disability sensitivity, we had brought in a consultant, Sarah Thompson, which was very helpful when it came to making sure that we were doing right to showcase appropriately the like arm, because we have some stuff where it's like mechanical limbs, augmentations. There's even in a snow picture that I designed, we made a cool walker chair so that it's kind of like able to have like snowshoes and it's walking across, giving them full mobility, which was super fun. So it was really cool getting to work with the entire team to make this whole thing come together. And of course, with the hundreds of people that were giving us feedback on the game playtesting Discord as well. It was a huge monumental effort to bring all of this to life.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I definitely appreciate you mentioning all of those people. And it is just amazing to hear all of those people. And really, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, the product really reflects the excellence that everyone has put into it, because it is really good. And I only have the preview PDF or whatever right now, and stuff at the time of recording, because it's really a really excellent game, and really excellently done. And I just want to, since we're down here at the end, and where can people find Starforged? Where can they find your artwork and learn more about you?
Sure. So you can find out more about Ironsworn Starforged, where you can sign up for the to be notified when its official release is going to come out and when it will be available for purchase over at starforged.absolutetabletop.com. You can follow myself at Josh Meehan Art over on Twitter. I have you can see the artwork on my portfolio at joshmeehanart.com. And yeah, I think you can also, there's some great podcasts like yours, as well as on YouTube, there's the Bad Spot podcast that I wanted to shout out, as well as Errant Adventures.
Yes.
Which you can find on where all podcasts are available.
Yes, and I have interviewed Steve Morrison, the creator of Errant Adventures.
Oh, cool.
Hasn't aired yet as we're recording, but it will have aired by the time people are listening to this episode. And also, just a quick shout out to Absolute Tabletop. I have interviewed Matt Click on the podcast a very long time ago, about 3 years ago. So people could check out that episode as well. I will be sure to include links, I should say, to Starforged, to your website, so people can check out the game, but also see your artwork and learn more about you. Well, Joshua, it was a pleasure having you on the show today. So thank you so much for coming on.
It was my pleasure. Thanks a lot, Matt.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Joshua today. If you would like to learn more about his work or Ironsworn Starforged, please head over to dicegeeks.com, find the show notes for this episode. You will find links for all of that stuff so you don't miss a thing. And I will tell you, Joshua's artwork is phenomenal, and Ironsworn Starforged is an incredible tabletop role-playing game. Definitely need to check it out. Show notes, dicegeeks.com. Go there now. All right. If you want some free stuff, you can also head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You get 20 free dungeon maps. You get a custom 5e character background, some other stuff as well. Also, you'll never miss an episode of the show, and each and every Friday you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the wild world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, it is my pleasure to come to you each and every week with an awesome interview about this amazing hobby of tabletop role-playing games. If you would like to help me continue this podcast, head over to patreon.com/dicegeeks, and you can learn how to support the show there. That would be greatly, greatly appreciated. All right, now until next Wednesday, keep gaming!